Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let me start by saying that yesterday, 143 countries, including the United States and Mexico, came together to condemn Russia's sham referenda as a clear violation of international law and unequivocally rejected any attempt by Moscow to illegally annex Ukraine's sovereign territory. As much as a condemnation of Moscow, the UN resolution is also a resounding affirmation of global support for everything that President Putin is actually trying to destroy. It's a vote affirming the right of every nation, big and small, to have its sovereignty, its independence, its territorial integrity respected. A vote affirming our shared commitment to upholding the United Nations Charter and international humanitarian law. A vote affirming the human rights of all people, including Ukrainian civilians who continue to suffer barbaric atrocities at the hands of Russian forces. With this vote, the world has never been more united in its repudiation of Russia's war, and President Putin has never been more isolated. We just completed our second high-level security dialogue between Mexico and the United States, in which we took stock of important progress toward three main goals that we set out to accomplish together a year ago under the bicentennial framework for security, public health, and safe communities: protecting our people, preventing transborder crime, pursuing criminal networks. We've made significant progress, reflected in unprecedented investments, legislation, law enforcement action. And these efforts have already made a tangible difference in the lives of Mexicans and Americans. Today's discussion focused on the areas where we need to make even more progress, such as redoubling our efforts to combat the threat of fentanyl production and trafficking, arms trafficking, and the exploitation of migrants. This is part of a broader, deeper collaboration between our two nations, with today's dialogue coming a month after our second high-level economic dialogue in Mexico City. Both dialogues reflect shared priorities set out by President López Obrador and President Biden, and both focus on delivering on issues that have a tangible impact on the lives of our people, such as strengthening our competitiveness in the 21st century economy, making our communities safe for all of their residents, dismantling transnational criminal organizations. The issues at the core of our economic and security dialogues are deeply intertwined: strengthening security, combating corruption, ensuring accountability for crimes and human rights abuses. These not only make our civilians safer, our citizens safer, but they create a better environment for starting a small business or attracting private investment. And fostering inclusive economic opportunity is also one of the most effective ways to address a root driver of organized crime, by providing people with pathways they otherwise would not have. While these high-level dialogues happen a handful of times during the year, dialogues are happening at multiple levels of our governments every single day, between U.S. and Mexican diplomats and development workers, prosecutors and law enforcement officers, public health experts, and migration officials. This is where our commitments are actually translated into actions that improve the lives of our people. Across all of these efforts, one fundamental proposition holds: none of these challenges can we solve alone. And increasingly, we have to build our bilateral cooperation to work with others. We're increasingly partners in adopting also a regional approach to shared challenges. Just last week in Lima, we held a meeting of the 21 signatories of the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection. We discussed the concrete progress we've made since the Summit of the Americas on meeting our shared commitment to create the conditions for safe, orderly, humane, and regular migration in our hemisphere, and charted further implementation efforts moving forward. Our nations are also working shoulder to shoulder at the United Nations to move forward a critical resolution that will sanction those responsible for supporting gang violence, corruption, and human rights abuses in Haiti, as that country experiences a dangerous resurgence of cholera and widespread insecurity. And so, across the bilateral, the regional, and global cooperation, we have, I think, one of the strongest, if not the strongest partnership we've seen, certainly in my experience. And I just have to say we're so grateful to our colleagues from Mexico, both for the substance and the spirit of our conversations today and indeed every day. With that, Marcelo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Antony. I'm going to turn to Spanish. Muchas gracias por la
Thank you very much
recepción y esta reunión
for
que
your
hemos tenido.
warm welcome
Para decir lo
and
siguiente.
for our meeting today.
El presidente López Obrador
President López
propuso una
Obrador
estrategia de
proposed
materia de
a
seguridad
security
que
strategy
empieza por atender las causas.
that
Entonces
starts
hay
with
2.2
dealing with
millones de
root
jóvenes
issues. There are
trabajando,
2.2
jóvenes
million young
construyendo el
people
futuro,
who are
Centrando
working
Vidas,
building
medio millón.
the
Se
future,
dice fácil,
Centrando
pero
Vidas,
es
500,000.
muchísimas familias y
So
personas.
we're helping many families and people.
Buscar que no haya impunidad. Se creó
The
una
idea is to
comisión
make
nacional de
sure that there's
búsqueda.
no
Hay
impunity. A
fiscalías autónomas en
national
México.
commission for searches
Se creó
was
una Guardia Nacional
created,
porque quería el
as
presidente
was a
como otros
National Guard, because the
principales
president wanted
dominar el territorio, porque antes teníamos
to secure our
cientos de
territory,
policías
because there were
distintos
hundreds
con,
of
siguen teniendo
police officers
funciones. Y una
who
cuarta que es
continue to work.
el
And there's a
entendimiento con
fourth
Estados
issue,
Unidos en
which
materia de
is
seguridad.
the agreement with the
Esta
U.S.
pieza
in the area of
está
security. So
funcionando.
this
El
piece
entendimiento
is working.
bicentenario
The
tiene
bicentennial
resultados. Eso es
framework
importante.
has
Hace un
shown
año lo
results. That
firmamos.
is important. We signed this a year
Creo
ago.
que somos los únicos dos
I think
países
we
que
are the
tenemos
only two
un
countries who
entendimiento
have
con un plan de acción
a framework with
y
a
evaluaciones
plan of
periódicas en todos
action
los
and
temas
periodic evaluations
para
in every
proteger a nuestra
area
sociedad.
to protect our
Déjenme darles
societies.
solamente una idea de lo que estoy
I'll
hablando.
give you just an
Yo
idea of what
decía
we're
en la mañana,
talking
y
about. This morning,
gracias
I
al
was
trabajo
saying that
entre
it is
México y
thanks
Estados
to the work
Unidos,
between the U.S. and Mexico.
32,000 armas
32 million
no llegaron
weapons did not
a causar
end up
letalidad en nuestro país.
causing lethal wounds
Fueron
in our
aseguradas
countries.
antes de
These
que siguieran
were
matando
secured
personas.
before they continued killing
17
people.
millones de cartuchos.
17 million rounds of ammunition.
También toneladas de
Tons
sustancias químicas,
of chemical substances,
metanfetaminas, 94
methamphetamines,
toneladas de
94
cocaína.
tons of
Una
cocaine.
buena parte de esa
A
cocaína
good part of
se ha
that cocaine
capturado
has been
en alta mar
seized on the high seas
con sistemas de comunicación comunes
with
con Estados Unidos.
common communication systems with the
229
United
embarcaciones,
States,
laboratorios
129 ships
en
labs
toda la República.
throughout the
Entonces,
country.
desde nuestro punto de
So
vista,
from
es
our
evidente que
point
el
of view, it
entendimiento
is
bicentenario está
evident that
funcionando.
the
Hay muchas cosas que
bicentennial
nos faltan,
framework is
claro.
working. There are
No
still
quiere decir que ya se
a
resolvió
ways to go.
todo.
This doesn't mean
Pero
that
el indicador
everything
más
has been
importante es
solved,
que
but the
por
most
primera
important
vez
indicator
en lo
is that
que
for the first time
ha sucedido en los últimos años tenemos una reducción
in the
de los
last few years,
homicidios.
we have seen a reduction in the
Pero no solo en
homicide
los
rate
homicidios, también en
in
los
Mexico,
secuestros
but not just
y
homicides,
también
also
en los robos
kidnappings,
y también el
robberies,
robo de vehículos.
and
Pero en
vehicle
homicidios,
theft.
lo que más nos preocupa en
When it
México,
comes to
hay una
the
reducción de
homicide
9.2.
rate in Mexico, though, the most concerning thing in
Y
Mexico,
una
there's been
parte de esto
9.2%
es mérito
reduction. A part of this
del entendimiento
is
que tenemos con
thanks
Estados
to
Unidos.
the framework that we share with the
Eso es lo
United
que
States.
significa
That is
trabajar
what
juntos.
it means
Déjenme
to work
explicar
together.
brevemente por qué.
Let me
Este es un
explain
mapa que veía ya hace
why.
un
This
rato
is
con
a map that I
secretario
showed
Blinken.
Secretary
Son
Blinken
todas las
just a while ago.
municipalidades de
These are all the
México donde hay
municipalities
armas
in Mexico where there are
que
weapons
fueron fabricadas
that
por
were made
empresas
by
de la industria de armamentos de Estados Unidos principalmente,
U.S.
aunque no solo,
companies,
y
mainly,
que nos está
but
ayudando
not
Estados
only
Unidos
in the
a
U.S.
tratar
And
de
the U.S. is
controlar.
helping us
Es como se ve en nuestro
to
mapa,
bring
esta es la
them under
pandemia de
control.
armas
So
que
you can
tenemos en
see
México.
this map. This is the weapons pandemic that we have in Mexico.
Estos son los municipios de Estados
These
Unidos donde
are
se venden esas
the
armas y
U.S.
se ven,
towns
son
where these
los que están en
weapons are
color rojo.
sold. These are
¿Por qué valoramos
shown
tanto el
in
apoyo y
red.
queremos
So why do
agradecerlo
we
el día de hoy?
appreciate the support
Y lo
so
vamos
much?
a
We want to
seguir
thank you for that
agradeciendo el año
today,
entrante.
and we'll
Que
continue to thank you for
logremos
that
reducir
next
esto. Si reducimos
year.
esto, la
If
violencia en
we
México va a
reduce
seguir bajando.
this, then violence in Mexico will
9.2
continue
quiere
to go
decir
down.
muchas vidas.
9.2 is a lot of
Y si
lives.
llegamos a 10 o a
And if we reach
15%,
10 or
quiere decir otro tipo
15%,
de ambiente
that will
de
create an
paz en
entirely
México. Entonces,
different,
muchas gracias,
peaceful
Antony,
environment in Mexico. So
por
thank
tu
you very much,
personal
Antony,
compromiso con
for your personal
el entendimiento
commitment
bicentenario.
to the
Señor Fiscal
bicentennial
General,
framework.
también muchas gracias.
Mr. Attorney
Y al
General,
secretario
thank you as
Mayorkas.
well. Secretary Mayorkas.
Attorney General.
Good afternoon. Last year, Secretary Blinken, Secretary Mayorkas, and I traveled to Mexico City to meet with our partners and colleagues in the Mexican government. Together, our two countries launched the U.S. Mexico Bicentennial Framework. Today, we had the opportunity to reflect on the work we had done over the past year and to share our commitment to addressing the shared security challenges facing both of our countries. The first topic we covered during our dialogue discussions today was also the first goal we outlined in our framework last year, to protect our people. That goal is the foundation of our partnership and the thread that runs through all of our work. As part of that effort, the Justice Department is working to meet the crisis of substance abuse within our own borders with a particular focus on fentanyl. We are providing resources to help communities with prevention, harm reduction, treatment, and recovery services. Our second goal, to prevent trans-border crime, is an essential element of both of our country's national security. Our agents and prosecutors are working to dismantle the dangerous cartels that bring deadly fentanyl into our communities in both countries. And we are working to disrupt both the supply and the demand of fentanyl. Just last month, the DEA concluded a 4-month operation that resulted in the removal of 36 million lethal doses of fentanyl from American communities. To strengthen our efforts to combat human smuggling and trafficking groups, the Department launched Joint Task Force Alpha last year. And to crack down on the criminal firearms trafficking pipelines that flood communities in both of our countries with illegal guns, the Department has set up cross-jurisdictional strike forces across the United States to disrupt these networks from start to finish. We have instructed our prosecutors and law enforcement agents to prioritize prosecutions of those who are responsible for the greatest violence, including criminal gun traffickers. And we have worked to enhance cooperation and bilateral information sharing on illegal firearms investigations. Finally, our third goal, to pursue criminal networks, particularly drug cartels, is an area of intense focus and prosecutorial resources for the Justice Department. A critical aspect of our work is our joint efforts to shut down illicit financial networks, which we know are the lifeblood of these criminal organizations. We will continue to work closely with our partners in Mexico to investigate, arrest, extradite, and prosecute individual members of dangerous transnational criminal organizations as well. On behalf of the Justice Department, our prosecutors, and each of our law enforcement components, I want to thank the government of Mexico for their continued partnership on all of these fronts, and I look forward to our work together in the coming years. Secretary Rodriguez.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you
Muy
very
buenas
much.
tardes a todas y
Good
todos.
afternoon, everyone.
El diálogo de alto nivel
The high-level
de seguridad
security
que hoy
dialogue
celebramos,
that
las
was
misiones
held
diplomáticas
today,
de México y
the
Estados
diplomatic
Unidos,
missions of the
los
U.S. and
servidores
Mexico,
públicos de ambas
public
naciones,
officials from both
representa el
countries,
compromiso y la
represent
convicción
the
de que
commitment and the
ambas
conviction
naciones
that both countries
de continuar enfrentando
mean to
juntos
continue
el
to
desafío de
tackle
la
together
seguridad
the
transfronteriza en beneficio de
cross-border
nuestros
security
ciudadanos.
challenge for the
La
benefit of our
colaboración
citizens.
internacional
Working together at
basada
the
en el respeto
international
mutuo
level based on
está
mutual
rindiendo
respect
frutos
is
al cerrar
delivering.
filas en la lucha
We are
contra
closing
el
ranks
trasiego
in
de
the fight
narcóticos
against
que
drug
ha generado
trafficking,
tanta
which
violencia en
has
nuestro
caused
país
so much
y un
violence
problema
in our
de
country
salud en
and
la
has
población
caused
de
a
Estados
health
Unidos.
problem
En
for
este
the United
encuentro
States.
abordamos los
During this
avances
meeting,
alcanzados
we
y
discussed
las
progress
tareas
made
que nos llevamos a
and
casa. Los
tasks
ejes de esta
that we are
cooperación
taking home with us.
están
The pillars
centrados
of this
en combatir
cooperation are
las redes
focused on
criminales que
fighting
atentan contra
against
la
criminal
paz de
networks
ambas naciones
that
y al
are
mismo
disrupting
tiempo
peace
en
in both
fortalecer la
countries
vida
and on
sustentable y segura de nuestras
making sure
comunidades.
that our communities have
México y
peaceful,
Estados Unidos
sustainable
tenemos
lives.
el
Mexico
reto
and the United States face the
de
challenge
reforzar el
of
trabajo para impedir el consumo
reinforcing
de
our
drogas
joint work
sintéticas y
to
emprender
avoid
mayores
the
esfuerzos para
use of
inhibir
synthetic
las
drugs and making more
operaciones
efforts
de
in order
elaboración y
to
trasiego de
ban the
fentanilo
operations
por la
of
delincuencia
fentanyl
organizada
trafficking by
transnacional.
transnational
Podemos decir que el
organized crime.
entendimiento
We can
bicentenario
say
está
that the
rindiendo frutos
bicentennial
para la región
framework
y
is
por ello nos
delivering for the
comprometemos a
region,
seguir
and
colaborando
therefore
para
we
dar
commit to
más y
continue to
mejores
work
resultados
together
en
in
favor
order
de la
to
paz.
provide more and better
Con esta
results
claridad, el
and
esfuerzo
peaceful
del gabinete
outcomes.
mexicano del
It is with this
gabinete
in mind
encabezado por el
that
presidente Andrés
the
Manuel
Mexican
López
cabinet,
Obrador
led by
transita
President
por
López
dos vías
Obrador,
fundamentales.
has two
Una,
major
interferir las operaciones de los
channels.
grupos
One, to
criminales mediante el
interfere
uso
with
de
the channels
inteligencia con
of
tecnología de alto
drug
nivel
trafficking groups
para
using
debilitar las
intelligence
estructuras
in
y
order
detener a los
to
principales
dismantle structures and
responsables de
arrest
esta
the main
violencia
actors
y
responsible for
combatir el
violence
tráfico de
and
drogas, el
fighting
tráfico de
drug
armas y el
trafficking,
tráfico de
weapons
personas.
trafficking, and
En México
human
ya los
smuggling.
resultados son
In
contundentes.
Mexico,
Por
the
ejemplo,
results
en
are
el esfuerzo
astounding. For
mexicano por
example,
la cero
when it
impunidad,
comes to the Mexican fight
alcanzamos
for
el
zero
número más
impunity, we
alto de
reached the
detenciones
highest
en la
number
historia,
of
de
arrests in history. We went from
65.149 integrantes
65,149
de estas bandas
members
delictivas,
of criminal
en las cuales
organizations.
5.944 corresponden
1,900
a integrantes de la
of
delincuencia
these were
organizada.
members of
Muchos de
organized
ellos
criminal
generadores de
networks.
violencia,
Many of
y
them
esto se
caused
hace con el
violence,
programa
and this was
Cero
done
Impunidad y
under
Cero
the
Corrupción.
Zero Impunity, Zero
La
Corruption
otra
program.
corriente es atender las
Our
causas que generan la
Other
violencia,
task is to
abatiendo
deal
la
with the
pobreza,
causes
la
that lead to
marginación
violence,
con
poverty,
empleo, salud, desarrollo y bienestar para los
disenfranchisement,
mexicanos.
by
Y
creating
también hay que
public
decirlo,
health,
de los
education
acuerdos,
programs, anti-poverty
una
programs,
campaña
and
masiva
there is
que se
a
hará de
campaign
prevención de
in the media that
adicciones
will be
en
held
ambos
for
países.
preventing addiction in both
Porque
countries.
este tipo de acciones
Because these
son necesarias
actions
para
are
atender
necessary
de
in
manera
order
preventiva esta
to work
problemática.
on the
Decir,
prevention
finalmente,
side of
que,
this
como
issue.
ven, nuestra
Finally, I would like to
estrategia
say
nacional de seguridad
that, as you can
es
see, our
muy
national security
importante
strategy is extremely
seguir
important.
nosotros
We must
fortaleciendo estas
continue
líneas,
to
porque
strengthen our
como
lines of
primera mujer,
effort, because as the
secretaria de
first
seguridad de mi
woman
país, me
who is
enorgullece ser
Secretary of
parte de este
Security in my
gabinete
country,
y
I'm
me
proud to be a part of
enorgullece
this cabinet,
ser
and I
parte
am
del
proud
trabajo del
to be a
entendimiento
part of the
bicentenario.
work of the
Y porque
bicentennial
nosotros
framework.
decimos que México
We say
no está
that Mexico
condenado a la
is
guerra,
not
está
condemned to
destinado
war.
a la paz.
Mexico is destined for peace.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Good afternoon. The government of Mexico is among our strongest and most valued partners. I am extremely honored to be here to mark the 200 years of friendship between our countries. The Department of Homeland Security is proud to play a role in implementing the historic bicentennial framework for security, public health, and safe communities, and honored to be a co-chair of the U.S. Mexico High-Level Security Dialogue. We share so much with Mexico. Our history, our cultures, our heritage are inextricably linked. Our economies depend upon the efficient flow of trade and travel across our shared border. And DHS, our Department of Homeland Security, is committed to ensuring our security and efforts facilitate lawful trade. We also have shared challenges. Our two nations face an increasingly complex and dynamic threat environment, including arms trafficking, migrant smuggling, and fentanyl trafficking. And we are committed to facing these threats with our neighbor, our partner, and our friend, Mexico. Today, the high-level security dialogue, our two countries discuss ways in which we can improve upon our joint efforts. DHS is committed to doing its part in several ways that I'd like to comment on briefly now. The flow of illegal firearms from the United States to Mexico feeds the cartels that are smuggling drugs and migrants into the U.S. Decreasing that flow not only helps stem violence in Mexico, it also increases our homeland security. Homeland security investigations, HSI, firearms investigations are up 500% since DHS launched Operation Without a Trace to identify, target, and investigate arms smuggling. From October 2021 to August 2022, CBP, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, seized 215 handguns, 159 long arms, and approximately 380,000 pieces of ammunition in 210 separate southbound seizures at our shared border. This summer, our Department of Treasury leveled sanctions against an arms trafficker with connections to the Jalisco cartel. This designation was a direct result of the strong relationship between the government of Mexico and U.S. agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security. We are increasing our ability to detect contraband through increased screening using non-intrusive inspection technology. Technological innovation and our harnessing of it is a key and vital tool to our efforts. We have also increased our interdiction capacity through expanded cooperation between our customs and law enforcement authorities along the southern border. Together, we increased northbound and southbound screening for contraband, including weapons, controlled substances, ammunition, and bulk cash. With our Mexican counterparts, we have increased mirror patrols at our shared border, developed a unified border task force, and enhanced our information sharing, including locating and addressing cross-border tunnels. To protect the most vulnerable among us, we have put in place detection and referral measures to identify and assist potential victims of human trafficking. In support of our Smart Border initiative, we are assessing ports of entry from both sides of the border in support of developing a model port with integrated technology and joint processes. The goal of this project is to ensure more efficient trade and travel and improve security. I want to recognize the valiant efforts of our ambassador to Mexico, Ken Salazar, in all of the efforts that I am describing. Yesterday, we announced additional steps we are taking to reduce the number of people arriving at our southwest border irregularly and create a more orderly and safe and humane process for people fleeing the humanitarian and economic crisis in Venezuela. Those who attempt to cross the southern border of the United States illegally will be returned. Those who follow the lawful process we announced yesterday will have the opportunity to travel safely to the United States and become eligible to work here. We also announced that we will make available nearly 65,000 H-2B temporary non-agricultural worker visas for fiscal year 2023, on top of, in addition to the 66,000 H-2B visas that are normally available each fiscal year. This advances the Biden administration's pledge under the Los Angeles Declaration for Migration and Protection to expand legal pathways as an alternative to irregular and dangerous migration. I am grateful for the close partnership we enjoy. DHS is dedicated to the U.S. and Mexico's shared commitment to security as reflected in the bicentennial framework. This effort will make us stronger and safer together. Thank you.
We'll now turn to questions. We'll start with Tracy Wilkinson of the LA Times.
Thank you. Thank you and bienvenidos. Secretary Ebrard, for you, please. President López Obrador has been issuing a lot of anti-U.S. Statements lately, a lot of anti-U.S. rhetoric. He's criticized, he says, arming Ukraine is a terrible mistake. Mexico is entering into a satellite installation deal with Putin that some people say has espionage capabilities. Given these things and others, does that harm U.S.-Mexican bilateral relations, and does it make it difficult for you to negotiate with the U.S. on other topics like immigration and drugs and such? And related to that, I wanted to ask you about the militarization in Mexico right now. In a country where historically the military has been implicated in massacres and egregious human rights abuses, and we're still, despite the 9.2% drop in homicides that you say has taken place, still thousands of Mexican civilians are being murdered and disappeared with impunity, including more than a dozen journalists this year alone. What then is the rationale and the reason to have the military ever more in the streets, extend their permanence in the streets, something that López Obrador campaigned against, and now including expanding their economic power, unprecedented in Mexico? And to Secretary Blinken, having listed all these things I just listed, does this give you pause or make you question Mexico's commitment to democracy And if I may, on a very different topic, I apologize. Saudi Arabia issued a statement last night or early this morning over the OPEC deal, accusing the administration of politicizing oil, saying they will not submit to dictates, their word, from supposedly friendly nations. And also, why did the administration ask for a month delay in the announcement as the Saudis claim? Thank you.
Before turning to Marcelo, Tracy, in response to your first question to me, the answer is no.
Sí, muchas gracias. Bueno, son muchas preguntas. Déjame sintetizar. Primero,
Thank you very much for your questions. Let me
lo que está diciendo el
summarize.
presidente López Obrador es que
What
la
President
participación
López
de las
Obrador
Fuerzas
is saying is
Armadas
that
se
the
haga
involvement
conforme a
of
la
the
ley.
armed forces must be in
Han estado
accordance with
participando
our
de
laws.
manera
They have
intermitente,
been
pero sin tener una
participating
autorización
intermittently
legal.
with no legal
Y era poco
authorization to do
transparente
so,
cómo participaban. ¿Qué
and
está haciendo
they were
ahora? Se crea
involved
una
in
Guardia
a
Nacional
way that was not very transparent.
y
Now we've
se le da el
created a
mando
National
a la
Guard,
Secretaría de Defensa,
and
porque no
command was
quiere
given
o
to
no
the
se quiere en
Secretary of
México que quede en
Defense
una ambigüedad
because
como fue, por
no
ejemplo,
one
la
wants
Policía Federal,
any
el titular de la
ambiguity.
Policía
For
Federal está
example, the
sujeto a
head of
proceso
the
en Nueva
federal
York
police
ahorita,
is
Genaro
on
García
trial
Luna.
in New
Entonces, lo que
York.
no queremos que pase en el futuro.
That's what we don't want to happen
La
in the
razón es
future.
esa, la
That
razón de
is the
fondo.
reason. That is
Ahora, México
the
tiene uno de los sistemas
substance
más
of it. Now,
garantistas
Mexico
del mundo,
has a system that guarantees
judicialmente hablando.
rights in our legal
El que
system
tú
more so than many
tengas a la Guardia
countries in
Nacional
the
no
world.
quiere
The
decir
fact
que
that
se
you
van a
have a
violar
National
derechos
Guard
humanos.
doesn't mean
Tenemos un
that human rights
sistema
will be
legal
violated. We have a legal system
que hace imposible eso
that
y
makes that
para
impossible.
convencerte te diría lo
And
siguiente.
to convince
Ve
you, I would
el
say
número
the following.
de
Look at the
reclamos de derechos humanos que hay en
number
la
of
Comisión Nacional de Derechos Humanos de la Guardia
complaints
Nacional y es
with the
mucho más
office at the
bajo que
National Guard, and
cualquier
it's
policía
much
del país.
lower than with any
Hoy
law
en día.
enforcement agency in the country
Entonces
right
quiere
now.
decir que estamos
So
cumpliendo
that
estándares
means
de
that we are
derechos humanos
meeting
mexicanos.
very high
Por lo que
human
dices
rights
de los
standards. Now,
periodistas,
based on what you're
se
saying
informa cada
about
semana de cada
journalists, every
investigación.
week we hear about
Hay gente
investigations.
detenida, autores
There are people
intelectuales,
who
materiales. O
are
sea, no hay
being
impunidad.
arrested,
Todos los
masterminds and
casos se
such. There is
investigan.
no
Todos los 12
impunity.
que
Every case is
mencionaste
being
ahorita.
investigated. As
En el
to
caso
the
de
12
desaparecidos,
journalists, when
primera
it
vez que
comes
se
to
investigan.
disappeared persons,
En México nunca se investigan los
investigations
desaparecidos.
are being investigated.
Lo
They
vimos ahora
never
en la reunión
used
porque
to be
nos está ayudando
investigated
Estados Unidos
before.
a
The
hacer
U.S. is
crecer
helping
la
us
plataforma
to
y las
grow
capacidades
our
forensicas.
platform and our forensic
Hay toda una historia que te puede contar
capacities. I could tell you,
que te puede
our
contar
secretary could
Carla
tell you
Quintana porque ella
our
ha
whole
dirigido estos
story, Ms.
esfuerzos
Quintana, because she has
que no se
directed
habían
these
llevado a cabo en
efforts,
México,
things that had
perdón,
not been done in
en todo el
Mexico
siglo.
in the
¿Por qué hoy es un
entire
tema? Porque
century.
estamos
Now, why is
informando
this
todo
an
lo que estamos
issue?
encontrando.
Because we are
¿Cuántos lugares hay?
being open about
¿Cuántas
everything we're
personas se han
finding, how many
encontrado?
places, how many
¿Cuántas
people
no
were
se han
found, how many
encontrado?
people have not been
Entonces,
found.
eso que estaba en una
So
nebulosa
everything that
hoy
was murky
está
before
sujeto al escrutinio
is
público y
now
entonces eso
subject to
garantiza que
public
no se
scrutiny.
repita.
So that
Que
ensures
no
that
puede
it will
ser
not
que
be
tengas
repeated.
en el cajón de
It can't
desaparecidos
be that in the box of
montón de
disappeared
homicidios y
persons you have a ton of
feminicidios y nadie los
different
investiga, no aparecen
homicides,
en las
murders that are
estadísticas.
not investigated, and
Entonces, se está
therefore they're not
reduciendo
part
el
of
número de
statistics. So we're
homicidios
reducing the
cuando
murder
estamos encontrando
rate
personas que fueron
when we're
asesinadas
finding people
en el
who
pasado
were
y
murdered
las
in the
estamos
past,
dando a la luz.
and we are
Entonces,
shedding
9.2
light
más
on this.
todo
So
lo que
there
hemos
is
encontrado.
no point
Entonces,
two.
Respecto a eso,
When it
respecto a la
comes,
seguridad, la estrategia de
that's
seguridad. Respecto a
security.
Ucrania, a
Now,
ver,
when it comes to Ukraine,
todas las posiciones que México ha adoptado,
all
ayer
positions
votamos una
of
resolución
Mexico, and we adopted a resolution
junto con Estados
yesterday
Unidos,
together with the
que es
United States,
rechazar la
which
anexión del
is to
territorio de Ucrania
reject
a la
annexing
Federación Rusa.
Ukrainian territory to
Nosotros
the
estamos en contra
Russian
de eso.
Federation.
Ya
We
lo
are
explicamos
against
en el
that.
Consejo de
We
Seguridad.
explained that before
Siempre
the
ha sido
Security
las
Council.
instrucciones del presidente de la
It's
República.
always,
La
those have
política
always been the
exterior la
instructions of our
determina él.
president. Our
Nosotros lo
foreign
operamos.
policy is determined by him. We
Entonces, nosotros tenemos
execute
una
it.
posición muy clara.
So we have a very
El tema de
clear
los satélites, a ver,
position.
se
The
publicó
issue
en
of
septiembre del
satellites,
21.
that's September
Lo publicó entonces la
2021. That
Agencia
was
Espacial Mexicana.
published
Hoy no ha entrado en vigor.
back then. It has not gone
¿Qué fue lo
into
que pasó?
effect yet.
Cuando
So
nosotros
what
firmamos ese
happened
convenio, Estados
when we
Unidos y
signed
Rusia
that
tenían un
agreement? The
acuerdo de
U.S. and
cooperación
Russia
espacial.
had a
Estábamos
cooperation
haciendo otro con
agreement
Ucrania, con la
for
Unión
space. We
Europea.
were doing the same thing with
Pero
Ukraine,
estalló
with
después la
the
guerra.
EU, but then war broke out.
Entonces, hoy en día cambió
So
totalmente la
today,
situación
the situation has
respecto a cuando
completely
se firmó.
changed as
Pero
compared to
en todo
when
lo hemos
it
hecho
was
público.
signed. But
No,
we've
en
made
México no hay
all of this
ninguna
public.
instalación
There are
de
no
ningún tipo de esa naturaleza.
installations
Entonces,
of that
la
type
posición
in
de México
Mexico.
respecto a
So
Ucrania es muy
the
clara.
position vis-a-vis
Hemos
Ukraine
procurado
and Mexico is very
presentar
clear.
posiciones de
We have
mediación,
made
hemos
sure
buscado,
to
presentamos a la Asamblea General los
take
corredores
to the General
humanitarios porque los
Assembly
vetó Rusia.
humanitarian
Lo
corridors
presentamos
that were
junto con
vetoed
friends,
by
se
Russia.
votó.
We put this
Y
together,
esa es nuestra
put
postura.
this forward
Nuestra
together
postura
with
es, ojalá
friends,
haya
and
una
that's
solución
our
pacífica,
position. We
pero
want a
no
peaceful
podemos aceptar
solution, hopefully,
ni
but we
invasión
cannot
ni la
accept
anexión
an
del
invasion
territorio de
or
Ucrania. Ni
annexing
lo haremos.
Ukrainian territory, and we won't do that.
Tracy, with regard to OPEC, a few things. First, just to review the history here, the Saudis had conveyed to us, both privately as well as publicly, their intention to reduce oil production, which they knew would increase Russian revenues and potentially blunt the effectiveness of sanctions. We made clear that that would be the wrong direction. On that basis alone, the impact that it would have potentially on sanctions, but also because we're in a global economic recovery. The recovery is fragile. We're dealing with headwinds from COVID. We're also dealing with headwinds from the Russian aggression itself. And so now is not the time to take energy off the market. For many, many months now, President Biden has been making clear that our goal when it comes to energy is to make sure that there is enough supply on world markets to meet demand. And particularly as we head into to winter in various places around the world, that's even more important. And so that was the lens through which we saw the OPEC decision. They also presented no market basis for the cuts. We said that to them, and we suggested that if they did have concerns about prices going down significantly, if their objective was to keep prices at a certain level, they should wait and see how markets reacted over the coming weeks, and wait at least till their next monthly meeting. So that's what we strongly urged them to do for the reasons I just said. They didn't do it. And as you know, we are not only deeply disappointed in that, we think it's short-sighted, and as the President's made very clear, that decision has to have consequences, and that's something that we're reviewing as we speak. The President's also made clear that given the strong bipartisan reaction against the OPEC Plus decision, that he wants to consult with leaders of Congress when they come back from the campaign trail to look at the most effective steps that we can take moving forward, keeping in mind that we have a multiplicity of interests with Saudi Arabia, and our policies need to reflect that. From before he was president, the President's made clear that we need to recalibrate the relationship with Saudi Arabia. We've been engaged in doing that for the better part of 2 years. We've taken a number of steps last year, including the focus on human rights, the efforts to end the war in Yemen, policies on arms sales. And that process is now continuing with one goal in mind, to make sure that the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia more effectively addresses and advances our interests.
Ariel Mutsatos from Televisa.
Thank you. Bueno, en español para
I'll ask my question in Spanish
porque estamos en vivo.
because we're going live.
Hay violencia en ambos
There's
países
violence in both
producto de
countries
las armas
that comes from
y la verdad,
weapons.
siendo muy
And
honesto,
being
es que
very
ustedes
honest,
aquí
all of
siguen dando
you
datos,
here continue to
pero,
provide data,
tanto en México como en
but
Estados
both in
Unidos las
Mexico
armas
and in the
siguen
United
matando
States,
gente.
weapons continue
En
to
México,
kill
pues porque
people.
los carteles
In Mexico,
obtienen
because
estas armas
cartels obtain these
por la
weapons
permisividad que hay
because of
en Estados Unidos
permissiveness in the
para
United States
la adquisición de
when
las
it comes
mismas
to
y en
purchasing
Estados
these
Unidos
weapons, and in the
precisamente
U.S.
por esa permisividad
specifically also because of that
Entonces, más allá de la
permissiveness.
política
So
y del
beyond
uso político que le han dado
policies
ya
and the
varios
political
gobiernos
use
de
that
ambos lados a este tema,
governments on both sides have made of this issue,
mi pregunta es,
my question is,
ustedes, no como políticos,
do
como
you, not as
servidores
politicians,
públicos,
but as
creen
public
que
servants, do you believe
factible
that it is
resolver
feasible
el
to
problema de las
solve
armas?
the
Y
weapons
si pueden,
problem?
de manera muy
And
puntual,
if you can, very specifically,
¿cuáles son
tell
las
us
acciones
what
que se deben tomar?
actions
¿Qué
must
acciones se
be
necesitan para
taken? What
resolver
actions are needed
el
in
problema de las
order
armas?
to
La
solve the
pregunta
weapons
es
problem?
para el
My
canciller Ebrard
question
y para
is for
el
Foreign Minister
secretario
Ebrard and for
Blinken, pero
Secretary
si
Blinken,
el
but if
secretario Mayorkas
Secretary
o el
Mayorkas
procurador o la
or
secretaria quieren también
the Attorney
responder algo, por
General would
supuesto.
like
Muchas
to
gracias.
answer, you're welcome to do so as well. Thank you very much.
Sí, muchas gracias
Yes,
por
thank
la-
you very much
por tu pregunta.
for
Mira,
your question.
nosotros pensamos que
We
ese problema,
believe that
como
that
otros,
issue is
en síntesis,
like
el
other
problema de
issues.
seguridad,
It's a
son muy
security issue.
complejos, pero
These are
claro
very
que tienen solución.
complex, but I think that
Si no
there
pensáramos
is a
eso,
solution to them.
no
If we didn't
deberíamos
think
ser
that,
funcionarios.
then we shouldn't be
Si tú crees que no
public
vas a
officials.
resolver
If you
algo,
think
por
that you're
favor,
not going to
renuncia.
fix something, then please just step down.
Sería un acto de deshonestidad
It would
intelectual.
be an
Entonces,
intellectually
claro que tiene solución,
dishonest
ahora es
act. So of
compleja.
course there is a solution. Of course it is
Eh,
complex.
Hemos trabajado muy de cerca
We
con
have worked very
la
closely
oficina del
with
secretario Mayorkas
Secretary
y también con el
Mayorkas'
Departamento de Justicia,
department,
el
as well
apoyo del
as the
señor
Department of
Blinken,
Justice,
para
with the support
lograr
of
qué
Secretary
cosa. A
Blinken,
ver,
to
es el mapa de
achieve
dónde
the following.
encontramos
This
las
map
armas que ya
showing where we
presenté.
find the weapons that I showed you
Este
earlier.
mapa es
This
dónde
map
se aseguran
shows
más armas en
where
México.
more weapons are
Donde hay
found
más efectividad en
secured
nuestro trabajo, como
in
verás, en
Mexico.
azul oscuro
So you'll see
es
in
donde hay
dark
más
blue,
armas.
dark blue
Entonces,
shows where
en la
there are
frontera
more weapons. On the
tenemos
border
más
then,
número de armas
we have
porque
a higher
podemos
number of
vigilar
weapons
quién pasa
because
con
we can
armas.
surveil who is
Y
coming
este es un
in
mapa que hemos
with
elaborado
weapons.
junto
This
con
is
las
a map that
autoridades
we
de Estados Unidos
created
de quién las
together
vende.
with the United States
Son
as
10
far as
condados de Estados
who
Unidos
sells them. These are 10
donde más
counties in the
armas se
United
venden.
States that sell the most
efectivo.
weapons.
Esto no lo podríamos hacer sin la
We
ayuda
couldn't do
de
this without the
Estados
help
Unidos.
of the
Es un
United
plan
States.
común.
This is a common plan.
¿Qué acciones se van a tomar?
What actions are going to
Ahora
be
el
taken?
secretario Mayorkas nos
Secretary
pidió que
Mayorkas
hiciéramos un grupo de
asked
trabajo
us to create a working
para
group
medidas adicionales que estamos
for
pidiendo.
additional
Ya
measures that
logramos
we are
cosas
requesting.
importantes,
We
ahora
have
queremos
already
lograr
made
más.
significant achievements, but we
Y
want to
para
achieve
eso
even
se
more.
le proponen
And to that
20
end,
diferentes medidas que son
20
de corto
different
plazo,
measures are
medidas regulatorias, revisión de las
suggested that are
fronteras, hay que
short
revisar más, tenemos que tener más
term
decomisos de quien
regulatory
quiere pasar armas
issues,
hacia México,
seizures for anyone
igual que
who
nosotros
wants
lo
to
tenemos del
take
lado de
weapons
México,
to Mexico,
de
just
quien
as we
pasa
have
armas en México.
in Mexico.
Entonces,
So,
esas acciones,
there
las
is
que
that.
decida
These
el gobierno de Estados
actions,
Unidos, sí creo que nos puedan
I do
permitir
believe that these
lograr
actions
para el
will
año entrante
allow us
un resultado todavía
next year
superior al que ya logramos
to
este primer
obtain
año.
even more positive
Cierro
outcomes
mi comentario.
than we have achieved this first
Total
year.
de
That
armas que
is the end of my
detenimos en México
first
fueron
comment. But total weapons
55.996.
in Mexico,
De
over 55,000
enero de
from January
2020 a septiembre
2020
22.
to September
Bueno, la fecha que estamos, ya
2022.
octubre. 55.996.
55,900 weapons.
se
Of these
aseguraron
weapons that
gracias
were
al
seized,
entendimiento
thanks
bicentenario,
to the
no
bicentennial
llegaron
framework,
a las manos de la
these did
delincuencia.
not fall
Estimamos
in the hands of criminals. We
que un
believe that
número alrededor de
it was a
37.000
number of about 37,000.
lo interrumpimos.
We were able
O sea, las
to
habríamos asegurado,
interrupt
pero después de que
these.
cometieran un delito.
That is, or we would have been
Entonces,
able
el
to
año que
seize them
entra
after a
podemos
crime
lograr
had been
algo
committed.
mejor,
So
y es lo que nos
we
hemos
have
propuesto y
done
creo que es
better,
factible.
and that is what we are
Entonces, sí
proposing, and
tengo
that
la-
is what is
ya no la
feasible.
esperanza, la
So
convicción de que
I
esto es
am not
vital para
just
México,
hopeful, but I have the
porque está
conviction that this is vital
correlacionado
to
a la
Mexico, for
caída de
Mexico
homicidios.
because it's linked to
Ahí
the
están los
fall in the
facts.
murder rate.
O sea, estamos siendo más
That
efectivos,
is clear.
también
We're
hay
being
menos
more
homicidios.
effective. There are fewer
Entonces, sí tiene
murders. So
solución y sí lo
there
vamos
is
a
a
hacer.
solution, and we are going to solve it.
In part because I didn't fully hear the question, but also because what I heard sounded like it was better addressed to my colleagues, I'm going to turn to them.
I'd be pleased to answer the question. I want to make very clear that what we're not talking about is a matter of gun policy in either country. What we're talking about is something about which there is unanimity in view, which is that it is illegal to traffic firearms against the law across an international border and arm traffickers and smugglers so that they can exploit vulnerable people and harm innocent people in another country. So there is unanimity of view in that. We have taken a number of measures, both independently and in partnership with one another, to address the trafficking in firearms across the border. I cited some of the examples, some of the data that reflect the success that we have had. The gravity, the seriousness of the problem is quite significant, and this is exactly the reason why we get together in a U.S. Mexico high-level security dialogue to assess the strategies that we have employed, to understand their successes, and to see what the gap is between where we are and where we need to be. And as Secretary Ebrard noted, we have agreed to create a task force to develop new strategies to look at our interdiction protocols, to look at the investigation and prosecution of cases, and to assess and determine what more we can do to counter this problem. So that's exactly why we have this type of dialogue. We remain committed to overcoming the challenge, and we will be unrelenting in our attack of it.
Edward Ribas from FA.
Thank you. For Secretary Mayorkas, regarding the arrangement on Venezuelan migrants, and why did you set the gap in 24,000 visas if just in September 33,000 migrants from Venezuela crossed the border? And para el canciller Marcelo Ebrard, ¿qué plan
For
tiene
Marcelo
México
Ebrard, what
para
would
recibir a los
Mexico suggest
venezolanos
in order
que
to
expulse
receive
Estados Unidos?
Venezuelans
And
who
finally,
are sent
for
back by
Secretary
the U.S.?
Blinken, is the Biden administration considering Haiti's request for troops, and how serious is this deliberation? Thank you.
So if I may jump in first and take a step back, because we have to understand the phenomenon of irregular migration, which is not specific to the U.S. Mexico border, but is a challenge for the entire hemisphere. And as Secretary Blinken mentioned in our dialogue this morning, is a phenomenon across the world. The number of displaced people is at an all-time high. We have seen, of course, Venezuela, a population of approximately 28 million people. Venezuela has seen the exodus of almost 8 million people, a little less than a third of its entire population. Colombia has 2.4 million Venezuelans resident within its borders. Migration, irregular migration, is a phenomenon across our hemisphere. Costa Rica, now, more than 2% of its population is Nicaraguan. So this is a phenomenon that is really gripping the region, and why our multilateral efforts are so critical. Our program is based on a core principle of the Biden administration, which is when individuals are so desperate to leave the country that is their home, they are placing their life savings and their lives in the hands of smugglers who exploit them for profit. It is our responsibility to build safe, lawful, and humane pathways that create opportunities for them so they do not need to avail themselves of the more desperate and dangerous measures that the perilous journey involve. And so the foundation of what we announced yesterday is to reduce the amount of irregular migration so that people can avail themselves of the lawful pathway. And the number that we announced yesterday is based on that core foundation, that people will not take that dangerous journey only to fail, to not succeed in reaching their ultimate destination, but rather will take the humane, safe, and orderly pathway to a better life.
Respecto a número de venezolanos
As far as the
que
number
tenemos,
of
déjame decirte lo
Venezuelans, let me
siguiente.
tell you
Hemos visto en
the
México
following. In Mexico,
un flujo
we have
creciente en los
seen
últimos
an increasing
4 o 5 meses,
flow over the last 4 or 5 months.
de manera importante porque
It's been significant
tenemos más venezolanos
because we have
llegando
more
a México
Venezuelans
que,
coming today
personas de Centroamérica.
than Central Americans.
Pero muchos están en México.
But many
Los que nos han
there are
pedido
many
refugio
in
están
Mexico.
en
Those
también les hemos dado
who
visas de
have
trabajo.
asked to
Entonces, no es de
remain
que
there
vayamos
are
a
in Mexico. They've
recibir
asked for
venezolanos
work
que
visas,
llegaron
so
a Estados Unidos y de pronto los manden.
it's not that we
Pasan por
won't
nuestro
receive
territorio y muchos están en
Venezuelans
nuestro
come
territorio.
through our
Lo que me
country.
parece más
Many
importante
remain there.
del
They're not coming
programa
back from the United States.
es
But what
que
I think
vas
is
a
more
poder
important than that
hacer un
is that
trámite
you'll be able to
sin
begin
hacer todo ese
a
recorrido.
process without having
quien haga ese
to go
recorrido
all the way
va a
there,
tener dificultades.
meaning that
Pero hay un camino
people
ahora
who undertake
regular
that journey have
que ya lo explicó el secretario
problems, but
Mayorkas.
Secretary
Y habría
Mayorkas explained that there
entonces
is
una razón
a regular path.
importante
With a regular path,
para
there
que
would
no
be a
corras
significant
todos esos
reason
riesgos,
then
sino que hagas
for
tu
you not
trámite
to run
directamente
all of those
por vía
risks, but to
electrónica.
begin
Eso
the
me parece que es algo
process
sumamente importante.
electronically, and I
Pero
think that is very
venezolanos
important.
en México
But
hay muchos, y
there are
hay
many
en
Venezuelans in
Guatemala,
Mexico, there
en
are
Panamá,
in Guatemala, in Panama,
Colombia, y otros
Colombia,
países.
of course.
And could I ask you to just repeat, please, the question to me? I want to make sure that I heard it properly.
Maybe in English. maybe if you can in English.
No, was it in English? I just didn't hear it
If
properly.
you are considering the Haiti's request for troops to send troops to Haiti, and
Thank you. So, on Haiti, we have, for the Haitian people, an incredibly challenging situation, and one that has a multiplicity of problems. Most recently, of course, the outbreak of cholera, but more broadly, a profound problem in terms of insecurity, where big parts of the capital, other parts of Haiti, are actually controlled by gangs, not by the state. And absent dealing effectively with that problem of insecurity, it's very hard to deal with the other challenges. For example, ports are blocked, roads are blocked, so some of the things necessary to deal with the cholera outbreak simply can't get to where they need to go. That's just one example. We've been working together and with other countries for some time to do a number of things. One of them is to increase the capacity of the Haitian National Police. The other is to support a political dialogue with the Prime Minister, with the Montana Group, with other stakeholders to try to advance Haiti toward elections. But one of the challenges in effectively dealing with insecurity is the nexus between the gangs and some of the elites in Haiti and outside of Haiti who are supporting them and directing them for their own purposes, not for the good of the country or its people. So we've been working together at the United Nations, including just this week, to impose sanctions on those who are actually taking actions that support violence and support gangs. At the same time, we have to look at what steps are necessary to effectively support the Haitian National Police, and whether there are other things the international community can do to help Haiti provide security effectively for itself. That's exactly what we're looking at now. We're talking about that among the various countries in our hemisphere and beyond, and of course we're talking to the Haitians about it.
Final questions from Jesus Esquivel from Proceso.
Thank you. My question is for Secretary Blinken, and I hope you don't pass the ball to Secretary Ebrard. You respond directly. Yesterday in a teleconference, Undersecretary Zúñiga announced that under the works on the bicentennial has been dismantled dozens of criminal organizations. But I asked him about where are these criminal organizations were dismantled, if there are American organizations or Mexican cartels. Because every time you guys mention cartels, everybody's thinking about Mexico. And probably Attorney General Garland knows exactly what I'm talking about. The DEA and FBI have a strategy called the American cartels. And I wonder if these organizations are American cartels, talking about gangs or motorcycle clubs who are directly involved in the distribution, sale, and transportation of fentanyl and all methamphetamines. And my question has to do with also the arms, because every time you guys mention the drug problem in the U.S., you look to the South. And I've been working here since '88, and it was the Reagan administration, the last one, and I saw that they have an effective campaign against drug consumption in the U.S. Fentanyl is causing the death of 270 people every 24 hours. It is an accumulation of lack of work on a health and education problem in the U.S. It's not always Mexico. And the numbers of the arms that have been confiscated demonstrate that the U.S. is not doing nothing in the southern border to stop the arms. By the contrary, Mexico has to go to the federal courts in the U.S. in frustration because you guys are not working as you just told us. So I hope, even if you disagree, be honest and tell us exactly what cartels are you talking about, or Zúñiga was talking about, and also what else you're going to do besides words to stop the arms trafficking to Mexico. And the last question is for Secretary Rosa in Spanish. Están bajando los homicidios, ¿es cierto? Pero la
been
inseguridad en
reduced,
México es
but
gravísima.
insecurity in
En el
Mexico
Estado de
is
México, y usted lo
enormous.
sabe,
In the
hay
state of
municipios que
Mexico,
están
and you know
controlados
that,
ya por los
there are some
criminales.
municipalities that
Son
are
los que
run by
imponen los
criminals.
precios de la
They
carne, del
establish
pollo,
the
de
price of
todo.
the chicken, of
Y
the
no se
meat, of
quieren meter
everything.
en el Estado de
And they
México
don't
porque hay
want to go to the
elecciones
state of Mexico
pronto.
because
Mi
the elections
pregunta
are
es,
coming.
¿usted cree que
So
con
my
las
question is, do you
estadísticas que nos
think
dan en la
that
mañanera,
with the numbers
la
that we had
gente
in
en
the
estos lugares
mañanera,
que sufren la
people in
inseguridad
these
se van a
people
quedar tranquilas
are
cuando la
going
realidad es otra y la Guardia Nacional
to keep quiet
simplemente
when the
patrulla
reality
las
is
calles,
different,
no
when
arresta, no
nobody's
investiga
being
y no
arrested,
persigue a los
nobody's
criminales?
being
Thank you.
investigated? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to pass the buck to my friend Marcelo. I may pass it to my colleagues, however, who may be better placed. But let me say a few things based on your question. We have, and we talked extensively today about the efforts that we're undertaking together to go after the transnational criminal organizations that are a plague on both of our countries. Because, as you've heard from our colleagues, our number one responsibility is to protect our citizens, Mexicans and Americans alike. And as my colleagues can discuss in more detail, we have deepened our law enforcement cooperation, we've deepened our information sharing, and we are working together more effectively, both to deal with drug interdictions, but also to deal effectively with arms trafficking. As you know, we criminalized for the first time this year the illicit trafficking in weapons. That is a very important tool. The numbers in terms of the seizures are up significantly from a year ago. So I think it's, I would disagree with the proposition that there have not been results. There have been, there are, but they're also not sufficient. And that's exactly what we recognized and talked about today. How do we intensify these efforts? Every weapon seized is potentially a life saved. Every drug lab that is disrupted is potentially a life saved. And as you've heard from all of us today, and we have the detailed information to support it, lots of lives have been saved as a result of our efforts. But we both believe that we have to do more because the magnitude of the problem is great. Let me just say on fentanyl before turning to my colleagues. We have about 110,000 deaths by drug overdose in the United States every year. Of those, roughly 70 to 75% are tied to synthetic opioids, notably fentanyl. So this is killing more people than gun violence and traffic deaths combined. So we are deeply committed to acting effectively against it. Mexico is also experiencing directly the ravages of fentanyl and synthetic opioids. Deaths are going up there as well. We have a comprehensive effort together that focuses on every aspect of the problem, starting with education. You've heard also Secretary Rodriguez speak to this. It's vitally important that we educate all of our people, especially our young people, for whom this is particularly dangerous, about the threat from fentanyl and synthetic opioids. We are doing that, and I think the Attorney General can speak to the campaign that we're undertaking. Mexico is doing something very similar. We are working very hard as well on making sure that the precursors that go into making fentanyl and other synthetic opioids that are legal, but then get diverted to illicit purposes, that the international community is doing a much better job in tracking those and making sure that if you're sending chemicals somewhere, you know who you're sending them to, and they're not diverted. We're cooperating very much on that. Mexico has put in place some important procedures to make sure that that happens. We've been doing the same thing. The two of us together will be working with other countries on this, and also the private sector, which is critical. And we are working together ever more effectively on actually breaking up labs, interdicting illicit diversions of chemicals, going after, as we said, the transnational criminal organizations. But more has to be done. More will be done. We're deeply committed to this together because we see the effect that it's having on our own citizens in both countries. But let me ask my colleagues to go into more detail.
Only to add to what the Secretary of State said, to begin with on the drug issue, We are focused on following this from the beginning all the way through to the end. So organizations that ship precursor chemicals, organizations that transform the precursor chemicals into fentanyl, organizations that press the fentanyl powder into pills, organizations that transmit them across the border, and then, yes, organizations in the United States that distribute in large scale throughout the country, and then on a regional basis, and then within cities. We have to attack each node, and we are doing this. The DEA has an enormous program in partnership with Department of Homeland Security and our United States Attorney's offices to hit organizations at every level, and our partnership with Mexico is essential to our ability to deal with transnational criminal organizations. Also, as the Secretary of State said, we have to have an awareness campaign. And the DEA, in its One Pill Can Kill campaign, in just a few months, took more than 30 million pills off the streets. These are lethal dosage pills. So we know that how serious this matter is. DEA is engaging at a community level in a community level campaign to make the communities aware, at a parent level campaign to make parents aware, and we're now considering a joint public campaign. Now, on the firearms matter, I think Secretary Mayorkas said it very well in saying that when illegal gun traffickers sell across the border to the cartels and drug organizations, those drug organizations then use that to protect their shipments back to the United States and damage the United States. So the injury is on both sides of the border. That's the reason we are working together so hard. And we are working together so hard thanks to funding from INL and work by the ATF. We have steadily worked with Mexico to build its e-trace capacity. I'm hoping that that is how they were able to come up with those maps, which map illegal guns in Mexico and where they were originally sold in the United States. That will help our ability to interdict and to prosecute illegal firearms trafficking. As the Secretary of State mentioned, just this summer in the bipartisan statute that was passed, it gave us authority to prosecute illegal drug trafficking. It enhanced the penalties for that and for straw purchases, allowed us to use wiretaps and other methods that we didn't have available before. And so we are engaged in that. Just last month, we had our first prosecution under this very statute. An American in Texas who just recently pled guilty to illegally purchasing over 200 guns, the main amount of which were transported into Mexico. So we are on this, and we are on this together as a partnership with Mexico.
What about the cartels that were announced with election?
I'm sorry, I don't know what the I know what the word cartel means. I don't know what the reference that they were talking about.
In a press conference, Undersecretary Zuniga that last year were dismantled a dozen of cartels. I just wonder, he's talking about American cartels, because the Mexican cartels, as far as I know, they are still working.
I'm sorry,
so what he's talking about, you probably know.
I think this is a question that you should direct to him, because I'm not sure I understand the reference. I'm sorry.
Sí, muchas gracias. Es innegable
Thank
que
you.
ha bajado la violencia
The level of
en
violence has
México.
been reduced in Mexico.
No podemos de todas maneras estar
We-
satisfechos.
we are not satisfied.
Pero ya
However,
se contuvo el incremento
we have been able to
a
stop the
cuando
increase
llegamos hace unos años.
compared to
¿Qué
what we
estamos
had in the
haciendo?
past. What are we
Estamos
doing?
trabajando
We
con
are working
inteligencia,
with
dando golpes
intelligence,
certeros contra todos
attacking
los
all
cárteles
those cartels,
criminales
criminal
en el país.
cartels
No
that
se
are
ataca
operating
a
in
un
our
grupo,
country.
se
We are
ataca
not
a todos
attacking
los
one
grupos.
group, we are attacking all
La
the
otra
groups.
cuestión.
And the other issue,
Son algunas zonas
there are
de
some
nuestro
areas
país
of
en donde
our
tenemos
country
un problema
where we have
de
a problem,
violencia. Son
an issue
6
with violence.
estados en
There are
donde se
6 states
concentran el tema,
where
el 50% de los
50%
homicidios del
of the
país.
homicides
Y
are
más
reported there.
focalizado son
And
50
especially
municipios
in 50
de los
municipalities of
2.441 que existen en todo el país,
2,441 that we have in the country,
en donde
where
se da este problema
you see
de homicidios
this issue
dolosos por parte
of
de la delincuencia organizada. Y
homicides
ahí
by
estamos actuando.
organized crime. And
¿Qué
that's
se ha
where we're
logrado?
working. So what have we achieved?
Alrededor de
Well, about
65,000 personas que se han
65,000
detenido
people
en este
that
lapso,
have been
de los
detained.
cuales 5,400 son
5,400
integrantes
are
de la
members
delincuencia
of
organizada.
organized crime.
Ahora decirle,
So,
de las estadísticas a las que
based on
usted
the
se refiere,
statistics that you
¿qué son?
mentioned,
Atrás de cada número
what
de cada
do they
delito
mean?
hay una
Each
carpeta de investigación
homicide,
de las
each
cuales nos
crime
hacen llegar
has
las
file,
fiscalías de los
and
estados.
the different
No
prosecutors'
son
office send us
unas
this
estadísticas de la
information. They
Secretaría
are
o del
not
gobierno
our
federal,
numbers of the Fed or the federal
solamente
numbers.
si no son de
They
las
are
fiscalías de los 32
numbers that
estados
come
del país.
from the
Así se
32
conforman,
states of the
digamos,
country.
el número de
And that's
homicidios que,
where we come
por
out
otro
with
lado,
the number of
decir
homicides.
que ya en
But in
2021 y 2022
2021 and
ha empezado
2022,
este
we
decremento
can see
que
a slight
nosotros consideramos
decrease
que
that we
seguirá
are
la
reporting,
tendencia
and we think
hacia la
that the
baja
trend
por
is
todo el trabajo
downward
que se hace
because of all the
diariamente
work that we
por
do
parte del
day in
Gabinete
and
de
day out.
Seguridad. Mire usted, y
So,
aquí hay un compañero del Gabinete
there
de
is
Seguridad como
somebody
es el
from
canciller Ebrard,
the Security
que
Council,
todos los
like
días a las
Secretary
6 de la
Ebrard,
mañana
every day at
inicia
6
el
a.m.
trabajo
he
para
starts
estar
working
pendiente de todas
to
las
be aware
problemáticas
of
que ocurren en el
everything that is
país.
happening
Y
in the
ahí se
country.
van tomando
And
las
that's where
decisiones,
decisions are
estando
being made.
presentes los integrantes del
When
gabinete,
the whole
los titulares,
cabinet
los
is there,
ministros, los
the
secretarios de Estado
ministers, the
y el
secretaries
propio
are there,
presidente de la
and the president
República.
itself.
No vemos como una cosa menor la problemática, le estamos dando la importancia que merece y lo seguiremos haciendo en conjunto también con los compañeros del gabinete del presidente Biden que hoy nos acompañan. Estamos trabajando en coordinación precisamente con el secretario Blinken
with
y
Secretary
con
Blinken
los funcionarios del gobierno de
and
Estados
the
Unidos.
members of the U.S. government.
That concludes the press conference. Thank
Con
you, Your
esto damos
Excellencies.
por
Thank you, everyone.
terminada la conferencia de prensa. Muchas gracias.